Okay, chapter 22, part 4. The environment puts selective pressures on populations, and as a result, new species may be formed. And so, remember, the process of developing a new species is known as speciation. So, we can define speciation as the origin of new species, but it's also the focal point of evolutionary theory because the appearance of new species is the true source of biological diversity. Now, we need to redefine what a species is. So your book defines a species as a group of living things with similar anatomical characteristics with the ability to interbreed. I like to use a more defined and refined definition of species, such as this: a group of actually or potentially naturally interbreeding organisms that share a common gene pool and are isolated from other such groups. This definition of species is the reason that it's the only taxon that exists in nature. If you think about it, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, and genus, these taxa are simply formed by inclusiveness, right? A family is a group of related genera. An order is a group of related families, and so forth. What the definition of one family in primates is completely different than the definition of a family in other mammals. But it's the species that has a true definition, and therefore it's the only taxon that exists in nature. This biological species concept was derived by Ernst Mayr. Now, how do we define species? Well, biologists compare morphology, body forms, and this may include some physiology, some biochemistry, or DNA sequencing. These two birds, though they look very, very similar, are actually two different species, an eastern meadowlark and a western meadowlark. To the untrained eye, they simply look the same. And even to a well-trained eye, such as mine, visually they look the same. But they're separated because they're isolated. And we're going to see in just a moment here how important this isolation concept is. What isolates the eastern and western meadowlark is not literally some sort of physical barrier, but it's a barrier that's put up because eastern meadowlarks' songs only tend to attract other eastern meadowlarks for mating. Now, the key to defining these species is found in this definition of species. So let's revisit this. A group of actually or potentially naturally interbreeding organisms that share a common gene pool that are isolated from other such groups. As I mentioned earlier, this definition is known as the biological species concept, coined in 1942 by biologist Ernst Mayr. Now, species are differentiated based upon isolation. And we're going to refer to this as reproductive isolation, some sort of barrier that impedes members of two species from producing offspring that are viable or fertile as hybrids. If we look at this definition, there's three main parts that I want you to consider. First of which has to do with actually, potentially, or naturally interbreeding organisms. In order for a species to be present, the organisms have to have the ability to interbreed. The second is this concept of gene pool, right? The gene pool is the pool of all the different variations of alleles for all of the different characteristics. And then key here is the third part of this, which is isolation. And we're focusing now on this reproductive isolation because it's isolation that will separate our gene pool, interrupt that gene flow, and allow selective pressures to work on those particular populations. Now, these barriers can be classified as to whether they contribute to reproductive isolation before or after fertilization. So remember that the result of fertilization is a single cell called a zygote. So we can consider a prezygotic barrier as a barrier that impedes the formation. So it's before a zygote is formed. whereas a post-zygotic barrier is a barrier that occurs after the zygote is formed. So we can look at some examples of these from our books. On the left, these are all reproductive isolation mechanisms that are pre-zygotic. And so we can look at some examples like ecological isolation. Two species that occupy the same area, but they occupy different habitats and rarely encounter one another. Therefore, they are reproductively isolated. Some sort of behavioral isolation. Species may differ in their mating rituals, like the eastern and western meadowlark that we just talked about. Even though they may be found in the same area, they're prevented from mating because of their mating ritual or courtship behavior or dance or song or what have you. You can have a temporal isolation, which has to do with differences in time or in the sense of the seasons, perhaps. So some species reproduce during different seasons, or they may be reproductively active at different times of the day. You can see mechanical isolation, literally structural differences between two different species that prevent mating mechanically. Tab A does not fit in slot B, so to speak. Or there may be some sort of way to prevent the gametes from fusing together biochemically. The process of gamete fusion is actually a very complicated one biochemically. And gametes of one species function poorly with gametes of another species or within the reproductive tract. And so this prevents the zygote's formation. Now, these are all pre-zygotic barriers. A post-zygotic barrier might be one that where two different species can produce an offspring, but this hybrid is in fact infertile, or maybe the hybrids don't survive. Or if the hybrids do survive, they are sterile or have reduced fertility themselves. So here's a couple of examples of some isolating mechanisms that we see in North America. These are leopard frogs, different species of leopard frogs. Most of the time, the species are separated by pre-zygotic barriers because the frogs have different mating calls, right? But there may also be a post-zygotic play in this also, because hybrids in areas where we have different species of leopard frogs that live next to one another may have a reduced hybrid survivability.